And we're live. So, good morning, everybody. This is a meeting of the Senate Agricultural Committee, Friday, February 5th. And we're fortunate to have the conservation districts with us this morning. I think we have 4 or 5. So that's great. And when we get started, before we get started, we'll have the committee introduce themselves. And Chris?
Good morning, Chris Pearson from Chittenden District.
Anthony isn't on, so go ahead, Brian.
Yep, Brian Collmore representing Rutland County.
I'm Bobby Starr, and I represent Orleans and Essex counties, along with a couple of towns in Franklin and one in Lamoille. Senator Polina from Washington County will be joining us when he gets his internet straightened out. And Senator Corey Parent from Franklin County is also on the committee, and he had some meeting he had to be at earlier this morning, and will be along as soon as he can. So I want to welcome the conservation districts to our meeting, and Jill, we'll turn it over to you. And you can introduce your guest and we'll proceed. So good morning and welcome.
Good morning, and thank you very much for having us. I'm Jill Arachi, the Executive Director of the Vermont Association of Conservation Districts, and I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves just so you can hear their voices.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Hillary Solomon with the Poultney-Meadowy Conservation District down in Poultney, Vermont.
Hi there, I'm Jennifer Byrne with the White River Conservation District in Orange and some of Windsor County.
I'm Jeannie Bartlett with the Franklin County Conservation District in St. Albans.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us. I'm Justin Michaud. I'm from the Orleans County Conservation Districts. I work for the VACD technical staff, and I work up in the Newports.
Yep.
Thank you. So I know you are all somewhat familiar with conservation districts, so my overview will be briefer than it is for committees with lots of new members. I'm going to give you a brief overview, and then each of my colleagues is going to hone in on some of the aspects of their agricultural work. And sorry, I just flashed my presentation. I'm going to put that back up. So, conservation districts, as you know, were created as a partner to the precursor to the Natural Resources Conservation Service. We were really intended to be the local and farmer partner of NRCS, created to address soil conservation concerns. And this is the introductory paragraph of our statute, which was passed in 1939. So we're really mandated to work on a wide range of natural resources concerns. There are 14 conservation districts in Vermont. This is our map, so you can see the major watersheds as well as the district boundaries. Our districts were self-formed basically over a number of years after that legislation was passed, and they either follow county lines or watershed lines. Conservation districts are local governmental entities In Vermont, they feel like mini nonprofits because we don't have any base funding at this time, which has been a bit challenging for us. But every district has a district manager. Many of our district managers have master's degrees in natural resource or agricultural fields, and several districts have additional staff, and my organization also has a staff. So collectively, we have about 55 staff statewide. We like to think of ourselves as a program delivery service statewide, with rooted in local reality. Every district has its own board that is elected or appointed from among local citizens. This is a graphic of the range of our programs. Traditionally, we work with landowners, and we're also saying now land users, not only land owners, to acknowledge that everyone has an impact on the land, farmers and municipalities. We work in a range of natural resource programs: agriculture, natural resource restoration, stormwater mitigation, forestry, education and outreach. And we work in the full range of program planning, implementation, and evaluation. So it starts with assessing needs, targeting focused areas based on needs, doing outreach and education to elicit support and participation, providing technical assistance, planning and designing projects or activities, overseeing project implementation, acting as the coordinator, and then verifying results. So just a few photos of our different program areas. So this is a roads project here. This is again focused on reducing soil erosion and erosion of any toxins that may come from parking lots and roofs. We inherited the dry hydrant program. Sorry, my going sideways isn't working. We've built over 1,000 dry hydrants in the state of Vermont. We implement natural resources projects. So these are primarily river, lakes, and forestry projects, but implemented often on private lands, sometimes also on public lands, depending on the funder. So you'll see a little bit more here. Okay, now it's going sideways. Agriculture programs. So you probably know us best right now for our work with nutrient management planning. We have a large RCPP grant from NRCS and we implement that program with small farms in partnership with UVM Extension. We also have a staff that supports NRCS conservation planning. You can hear from Justin. So the fairly elaborate process of assessing the land and where the resource concerns are, and then planning what projects will be implemented. And then also project management. You know, we fund some projects, but often we're the facilitator of the process. So we're helping landowners and farmers decide who to apply for, fill out all the forms, do all the paperwork, identify engineers if necessary, provide some oversight, and then fill out the paperwork to get paid for the practice in the end. We also do education and outreach, honoring our losses here. And our education and outreach is in all ranges. This is focused on agriculture. We support the Envirothon, which is a high school education program. Competition. We do education for school children through conservation field days. We work with high school students and college students, and then foresters, farmers, citizens. And then we also educate the public about the work that the agricultural community is doing to protect our natural resources and our water quality, which is highlighted here. We also participate in a range of planning and prioritization processes. I'm not going to read this whole list, but you'll see it ranges from the basin level, tactical basin planning, which is managed by the Department of Environmental Conservation, all the way to national policy, which is largely driven by our national organization, the National Association of Conservation Districts. We have two entities at the state level that support conservation districts, a state agency, the Natural Resources Conservation Council, and my organization, which is a nonprofit association. I wanted to mention Vermont Agricultural Water Quality Partnership. You may want to have some testimony from this collective group at some point. Keep thinking we should do that. So this is a group of 9 governmental and quasi-governmental organizations, federal, state, the VHB, UVM Extension, and the conservation districts at the local level. And the purpose of this partnership is really to coordinate efforts to share information confidentially in a non-regulatory way, and to give farmers the best, the best experience of technical assistance and financial assistance support. This is our expense. So we had $3.7 million of expense in fiscal year 2020. Collectively, all the conservation districts plus VACD. You can see the heavily state and federally funded. Our funders are primarily Agency of Agriculture, Department of Environmental Conservation, and NRCS. And then some, small grants often provide opportunity for creativity in the way that the federal programs sometimes, are more restricted in terms of what you're able to do with that funding. So that's fun. And then the pie chart on the right shows how we spend our time. So this is not by budget, but by staff time. It emphasizes quite a bit of agricultural technical assistance. And then there's more funding, pass-through funding for construction projects, which is not really captured. It's captured in $3.7 million. I wanted to highlight the fact that we, conservation districts and VACD, had to write 140 grants for this funding, which is a burden. We're still hoping to identify a source of dedicated funding for districts so that we don't have to spend so much time with grant administration. These are our partners. I will not read the total. So we're heavily government funded, but we partner at all levels, federally down to the local level. This is an overview of, again, our agriculture programs, and my colleagues are going to hone in on some of these. Each district gets to establish its own programming, and these are our activities in 2020.
Jill, I just had a question about your funding. Do you guys get any clean water funding that comes through the state? Is that some of the grants you're applying for?
Yes, our Department of Environmental Conservation funding and our Agency of Agriculture funding is both clean water fund funding and partially capital fund budget funding.
So the 50, I remember this from last time, you having to write so many grants, and there was a time when we had talked about trying to streamline that, just because it's such a not an efficient use of your energies. Has that scaled down, or have we not been able to get there yet?
We're not there yet. It's, we have both our state council and my organization, we have some umbrella grants. So we manage a lot of these funds now directly rather than, and then give sub-grants to the district. So it streamlines things a little bit, but there's still a grant writing requirement for district managers. They don't have flexibility in how they spend their time. They have to work on their grants. So that's a real disadvantage to not having a source of core funding, because, they want to go to a meeting and, their input is valued. If there's not a grant to go to that meeting, they're not able to go, which is, I know district managers who've been asked by towns to assist with this or that, and they're like, I'm really sorry, I don't have the time to help you, It's a disadvantage.
In terms of the state dollars, are you consistently getting about $1 million or something?
It's about, so the grants span, the grants from DEC tend to be 2-year grants, and the grants from the Agency of Ag are 4-year grants. So the Agency of Ag grant is over $1 million, split up over time, so they spend it over 4 years. The district spend it over 4 years. And then the DEC grants tend to be 2 years. They support trees for streams, stormwater remediation projects. The stormwater pass-through has, last year it was about 900,000, and now we're working on one that's 1.3 million. And most of that is passed through to the community for the whatever the construction project is. There's a little bit of planning time in a separate grant agreement. We also have grant agreements by project phase, unfortunately. So, you know, assessments are one grant, planning is another grant, design is another grant, implementation is another grant, rather than sort of funding that supports the full range of programming.
We love
Seems as
funding
though-
bureaucracies.
Yeah. Seems as though we could streamline that or for a longer period of time, because it's sad to have people sitting there writing grants when you could be, out working with projects and getting things done. So. Yeah, Brian.
Thank you, Bobby, and good morning, everyone, and it's great to see you all again. Jill, I have to say, until you showed the slide about the rural fire protection, I had no idea that fell under your purview. You mentioned that you inherited it. I think is the word you used. Who had it before? Sorry, I caught you.
Excuse me. It was managed by the RC&D Council. So Resource Conservation Development Council. This was an organization that was created to bring together the different aspects of USDA programs. It was a really cool idea. So it involved conservation districts, rural development, FSA, NRCS, and the councils had director positions funded by the feds, and several years ago, those positions, that program is defunded.
Okay.
So Vermont lost our two R&D councils, our C&D councils. They were not able to continue to function independently as nonprofits, but their programs survived. So the Better Back Roads program was an RC&D program. It's now been integrated into the state government, and so has the Rural Fire Protection Program. So the programs actually done in Vermont by RC&D were very important.
Thank you very much.
And have survived this sort of dissolution of the organization.
Well, and don't miss, we put money into that fund through either the capital bill or appropriations each year for the dry hydrant programs, and you folks administer that for the whole state?
Yes. So there were two RC&D councils, but the one based in Berlin managed that program, and we inherited the whole program and the manager of the program, Troy Dare, who's been implementing that program since it began when he was a student, a work-study student at Vermont Technical College. He's an engineering tech. So he works directly with fire departments and towns, does the outreach, does site visits to identify sites, designs projects, manages the grants, oversees implementation, certifies that the hydrants have been built to his specifications, and then processes the payments. And we're supported through, it's now public safety, it's the fire protection division of the state of Vermont. So we get two significant, two grants. There's a line item in the big bill, and then there's some capital funds that come from the Department of Public Safety. And then we get about $25,000 a year from the Forest Service for rural fire protection as well.
Yep. Any other questions? Jill, you proceed now.
I will let my colleagues continue. Thank you.
Yeah, so is Hillary up next or?
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning, and it's nice to be back. I hope my internet connection is okay.
Yeah, working fine.
Okay, great. It's really nice to see you all again. I do think I have spoken before each of you before, so that's nice. I also just quickly, I love how close-knit Vermont is. Jill, one of my neighbors was in one of your pictures.
And one of mine was in their pictures, Jack Laser.
So again, I'm with the Poultney Meadowy Conservation District. We're down in the western part of Rutland County. We have 4 full-time staff members and 3 seasonal staff, and then a number of interns that work with us on our summer programming. We work on lands that drain to the South Lake watershed, which, as you all know, is one of the segments of Lake Champlain that has some of the higher phosphorus concentrations in the water. There's a really large land area compared to the size of the lake that drains into the lake. And so when the TMDL modeling was completed, it was very difficult for the modelers to find a scenario where, even with all of the best management practices placed on the landscape, wherever they could possibly be placed, the water quality in the South Lake part of Lake Champlain reached the concentrations that they would have liked to see for the TMDL. Our district works in 5 program areas, and I'm just going to go over those very quickly and then focus on agriculture. The first sector that we work in is forest lands management. The South Lake Champlain watershed has one of the highest reductions called for in the TMDL for phosphorus reduction in forest land runoff. It's a 40% reduction, which is compared to most of the rest of the watershed in Vermont there's a 5% reduction called for from forest lands. So I think that's relevant here because a lot of forest lands are actually owned by farmers. And so those farmers might be aware of the reductions that are required, from their production areas and their field practices. But at some point, there will be reductions. They'll be looking at forest lands to make reductions too. And quite a bit of our area is forested. I work in stormwater projects. Also, the district has been involved in each of the stormwater master plans that have been completed in our area. Those projects are assessment projects to try and locate stormwater projects, and we have identified and prioritized over 200 stormwater projects in the district, and implementation work is starting on those projects. We work in the natural resources related sort of education and outreach area. We try and do a lot of education and outreach just through our normal grant programming, but we also do a little bit in schools as well. We operate a native plant nursery and participate in tree plantings each year, and then the native plant nursery, which is located in Poultney on actually Village of Poultney lands. It's been a nice partnership with the town. Is an area where we can hold some of our educational programming, especially when we're looking forward to holding some more of that in the future. Obviously, last summer was unusual and we had one open house, but other than that, we didn't have a lot of educational programming for obvious reasons. We participate in watershed assessments and research, and we have been participating in the La Rosa Water Quality Monitoring Program with the state since its beginning in 2003. So we're looking forward to continuing that participation this year, although it is currently unfunded. And then agriculture, about half of our budget and 2 of our full-time staff members participate in our agricultural outreach and water quality programs. We participate in many of the same programs that the other conservation districts participate in. The first one is through the Agency of Ag. We like acronyms, so it's called AgQuip because it comes through the clean water funding. We have about 2/3 to 3/4 of a staff person who's funded through these programs or through those particular funds, sorry. And they work with about 25 to 30 farms each year. And I'll let the other districts' staff talk more about that particular program. We participate with UVM Extension on the Agency of Ag tile drain monitoring program. So we collect samples at the outlets of tile drains, and then Agency of Ag will look at all of that data collectively and try and make an assessment on the impact of tile drain effluent on surface water quality. We participate in a statewide effort to help farmers get nutrient management plans and help them learn how to create their own nutrient management plans. We provide a lot of support both in the field, collecting soil samples and manure samples, and then also helping them enter their data, interpret it, and make manure spreading recommendations, et cetera. And that program really, Jill has been really essential in that program, helping the districts get funding. It's been a great partnership between the districts, NRCS, and UVM Extension. Our newest ag-related grant is actually a wetlands outreach grant. So we try and provide, bring on site when we're visiting farms information about wetlands that might be located in marginal farmland area where they might consider doing some type of a wetland conservation program. The farmers have been maybe not super excited about transitioning land out of ag production into wetlands, but they know the land really well. And so a lot of times there's an area that they may have farmed or their parents may have farmed on an adjoining landowner's land that isn't a farmer, that is a wetland, and they stopped farming it because it was a wetland. And so we've gotten a couple of referrals to those types of properties, which have been really helpful. The other thing we do is communicate with farmers who are doing field, installing field practices on their own without cost share. And so we try to make sure that that information gets put in the partner database and then is tracked for the TMDL reductions. Finally, our cornerstone, I guess, agricultural program is the ACAP program. It's the Agronomy and Conservation Assistance Program. That program was initially funded through the through US EPA and is now part of the Clean Water Fund. This is our longest standing program. We've had the same staff person as our agronomist for the last 10 years. This program is going into its 11th year this year. It's run in partnership with UVM Extension. And the reason that US EPA originally targeted our area in Rutland County, so we work in all of Rutland County, both the Rutland Conservation District and our Conservation District for this program. And the reason it was targeted is that of the roughly 100 farms that we work with, 2 are medium farms, 25 are certified small farms, and the rest are true small farms. And so a lot of times it's just family members working on the farm. It's usually multi-generational, and usually those farmers don't have time to get off the farm and to go to workshops or trainings. And so they're really best served by somebody just showing up, knowing their operation, knowing what programs might apply, and then helping them sign up. During our last grant, sort of our grant contracting phase, Jennifer worked with 46 farms, and she had 170 on-site visits. And we believe that this consistent sort of help is really advantageous to the farmers. And, we're able to get to know them, get to know their operations, and we hope provide help that's, that really aids them in their farming endeavors. One of the areas that Jennifer specializes in is soil test phosphorus levels on fields that are high, come back high, obviously are a threat to water quality. And one of the things she does is work really closely with these farmers who have these high test results. Usually they're down in the river valleys. So any runoff might make it to a river. So she works with them really closely, monitoring those soil test phosphorus levels, tries to help them grow crops with none or very little nutrient inputs, and then hopefully over time to slowly draw down those phosphorus levels. And one of the things that Jen has learned is that there are usually 2 reasons why a field has really high soil test phosphorus. Either the field is really conveniently located to the manure stack or pit, so in a pinch, it can be used for spreading. But the other thing she thinks this is actually more common, is that, in Vermont's history of settlement, we had a lot of just family farms where each family had a number of animals. And that these areas that are high in soil test phosphorus are actually old settlement areas where a family would have had a couple of cows and a couple of horses, and may have lived in that area or had animals housed in that area for quite a long time potentially. So that is what I wanted to present today. And I don't think we're here with a formal ask today, but obviously the grant writing, the time we spend grant writing is something that interferes with our ability to really be out working with people. And just seeing how having, as a district that's had a long-term stable program, it's definitely been to our advantage. And it would be really nice to see that type of stability, or to know that you had funding for the next 5 years to really have a program that you could build upon. So thank you very much. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Hillary. Could some of the grant writing be done at the main office to cover the entire state, or is each district kind of have their own programs that they have to write the grant for?
I can tell you, so right now I'm writing 4 grants. I was actually at the office till 12:30 last night, so I'm pretty tired today. One of them is to fund our water quality monitoring program, which DEC unfunded and announced to us in the fall that they weren't going to fund our staff time for that program. One of them is to do a functioning floodplain assessment in a watershed that has really bad flooding and the floodwaters threaten the village of Pollitt. One is to do a scoping study where runoff from Castleton University and a couple of streets are flooding the library and causing dangerous conditions in Castleton. Was that 4? I think I said 4. So they're all very different. It would be really hard for somebody besides me to write those because I know all these projects really well. Oh, the other was for a watershed action plan for Lake St. Catherine Association, for the Lake St. Catherine watershed. So they're actually submitting it, but we wrote it for them. So it would be just very difficult for anybody else to do that because we work in those areas and we see, we identify the problems and we know them really intimately. So it's hard to create sort of a maybe rationale for why we need to do the project if you don't know that area very well.
And who do you send those apps to?
One of them's going to the license plate grant program, which is Department of Fish and Wildlife and DEC. That's the one for monitoring. They've said they don't think they'll grant it because DEC doesn't want to fund monitoring this year, but it was just worth a try. And the others are going to the Lake Champlain Basin program as part of their technical proposals this year.
So they have plenty of money, but you have to fool around and beg for it to do these projects.
Yeah, I think so. I always think how great would it be if we just had a chunk of funding that came in to fund a district manager position, and then the district manager would just set up programs and write grants. And like right now, most of my time is actually spent on projects because we don't have funding to do the grant writing. And so that grant writing just comes in extra. That's, after everything else is done.
And it would be difficult if somehow we had a grant writer in place to work just for the districts. It would be very hard for that grant writer because all the projects are different and require probably much different answers and questions and all that.
Yeah, I think so. I think the other piece that would be difficult would be the reporting at the end of the grant period, because you've overseen this work. And so, you have all the photos and what happened and what dates everything happened on. And so there's that piece too, that the reporting would be difficult to sort of task out to somebody else as well.
Have you figured out any simpler way of putting a grant together rather than staying up until midnight writing all the little details?
That was a little bit of an unusual circumstance. Just, but you just happened to catch me in a week that I'm feeling a little pressured. We're competing against UVM and a lot of really highly qualified sort of groups. And so I think that it would be, I think the quality of the applications are high. And so it would be hard to not put in something that was really well thought out.
Yeah. Other questions? Jenny?
I just wanted to comment on your question as well and add a little bit to the answer, because we do have, as Jill alluded to, a couple of people working across the state to bring in kind of umbrella or block grants that then the districts can apply to. And those are often a bit of an easier proposal for us to write. But ultimately, a high level of reporting and proposal writing is still needed because the funding organizations want to understand where their money is going with a great level of detail. And in some cases, they want a great level of control and accountability, even as that money is rolled out, not even just afterwards in reporting. And so just that level of detail that's required by the funders requires a lot on the part of the local districts to pass that information up, whether it's going via someone who works statewide or whether it's going directly to a larger scale funder. It's just a lot of information that needs to be shared back and forth.
Well, I know where some of those questions come from, and you're looking at 4 of us that are part of that organization. When they come before the legislature and request their budget to be filled or asked granted, there are a lot of questions because it's the public's money, and we end up having to answer to the public. So we have to get the answers from you, well, not you directly, but from the folks that dish the money out. And it's hard to figure out an easy system for accounting. And if it's too easy, then you get mismanagement and it gives the program a black eye. And so at some level it has to be, and your guys are, you're on the ground and making sure that it's spent properly and handled and we're getting the best bang for the buck. But it seems like we could do it a little bit different to make it easier. But any other questions from committee members? If not, I will move on to Jen, the list has you next. Collmore?
Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't see your hand, Brian. Sorry.
That's okay, Bobby. No problem. So when I'm listening to Hillary, I'm struck, and I was at one of the educational things. It was in a meadow or field somewhere about storm runoff, and they had little things set up. It was really good. And the point you made, Hillary, I thought was well taken about a lot of times, especially on a small farm, a small family farm, you have to have, you've got to concentrate on what you're doing at the farm, and you don't have time to sort of go to a lecture or an event that you folks might be doing. So I'm wondering, with the virus environment that we're in, it seems like they could stay on the farm and you could do one of these Zoom calls. And I'm just wondering how that all worked. And it may be one of those unintended benefits of being in an environment like we are now, where, a farmer at some level wouldn't be able to go to a whole bunch of outside events, but could be in his kitchen or wherever, the family room and get some training. So I was wondering how it affected you.
Yeah, I'd say, so we're actually putting on a training over Zoom next week. So we're going to see how it goes. We have this situation where I'd say about half maybe half of our farmers we have email addresses for, and they use computers and are very comfortable, but the other half don't tend to go to computers as their first way to get information. And so we have farmers that will, check their email once a month, or, they don't find that sort of a comfortable space for learning. We did feel lucky because, farming is essential business. And so the farmers were obviously there and farming. So we were able, with social distancing and mask wearing, to visit, carefully over the summer. And we appreciated that, but we're definitely feeling it as we try to help update nutrient management plans. We have 2 farmers that were actually writing their plans, helping them write their plans, and neither one feels very comfortable with Zoom. So the lectures are over Zoom this year, and we're trying to get them set up so they feel comfortable. But we're kind of feeling that out with them right now. It hasn't been something they've really wanted to experiment with, these 2 particular farmers. So we'll see how it goes. And I'll send you an invite to the training and then let you know how many farmers show up.
That would be great. I'd appreciate that. And
Sure.
I do want to just mention, and we've certainly learned about this through the whole state, but in Western Rutland County especially, even those who might want to participate in a internet kind of education are handcuffed because they don't get high-speed internet on a consistent basis. So we've got to work on that too.
Yeah, it's true. One of my staff doesn't have good enough internet, and so she, even when we were all supposed to stay at home, she had sole use then of the office, so she could participate in meetings. So you're right. It's a problem.
But thank you for what you do.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, we'll move on to Jenny from Franklin County.
Hi, everyone. Great to be with you all again. Thank you for the time. So again, I'm Jeannie Bartlett, and in 2016, I took the position of managing the Franklin County Conservation District with the goal of growing the district from a very limited 10-hour-a-week position to an effective partner for water quality. And I believe we achieved that actually quite quickly. We now have a team of 3 with a full-time conservation specialist and an Eco AmeriCorps member. And we're an integral part of the agricultural water quality efforts in the Missisquoi Basin and the North Lake. And I'm personally actually moving on. I'm in the process of training someone who brings a greater breadth of experience to manage the district. So the next time you hear from the Franklin district, you'll be hearing from Lauren Weston, though I'm definitely happy to be in touch should any of you have questions for me. So I'm going to give you a bit of a deeper dive on how several of our agricultural programs have converged in our work with one particular farmer. This is someone we first reached out to in 2017 when the required agricultural practices and the requirement of certified small farms to use nutrient management planning was still fairly new. So this farm hadn't worked with NRCS or the Agency of Ag in the past, and they didn't have a nutrient management plan, but they immediately signed up when we reached out, and it was really clear that they were driven to do the right thing. So that fall, we soil sampled all their fields, we ran erosion models for all the fields, and we helped them through UVM's nutrient management planning class, integrating all of that information that we had gathered into a plan for what nutrients go where at what time. Since then, he's been keeping really clear records of cropping and nutrients, and we help him add those records to his nutrient management plan in Go Crop every year. One thing that came up in the erosion models that we ran, and from seeing some small ephemeral gullies within his cornfields when we were out there, was that some of his fields were a bit steep for having annual crops. And so we suggested a variety of alternatives that would reduce the erosion, and right away he seeded down the most critical areas. And since then, he's chosen to gradually seed down actually his whole farm over the course of several years. He's also been cover cropping for several years on his own dime. He opted not to use state or NRCS cost share programs for the cover cropping. So his fields are among those that we've surveyed this last year so that they're added to the state's TMDL progress calculations as a farmer-funded improvement. And like how many of our relationships with farms have begun, outreach for nutrient management planning was just the beginning of a longer relationship. We really want to see these farms succeed through an extraordinarily difficult economic crunch, and we want to see water quality in our streams and in the lake improve. So there's plenty of reasons to keep in touch all the time. And so 2 years ago, we were out on a routine visit and we noticed a massive stream bank failure. It was about 5 feet wide and 250 feet long on an agricultural ditched stream between a couple of fields after a spring thaw. And there was massive amounts of phosphorus and sediment going into the nearby stream. Lots of streams across the state have historically been straightened with the goal of getting water off the landscape as quickly as possible. And of course, now we realize that that makes for less stability in the stream banks and more erosion and worse habitat. So we worked with the farmer and the DEC Rivers program to do an active stream restoration, funded by DEC, managed by us, and designed by a contracted professional. And we sloped back the banks to a stable angle and added willows to aid long-term stability. Now, lots of other programs that we work with farmers provide an economic benefit to the farmer or have the potential to. This one didn't. We were straight up asking him to let us cut away some of his adjacent farm fields. We gave him a few different options that had variation in how much of a mini floodplain we created in the bottom of the stream bed. And he ended up going for the one that was the most proactive, the most likely to have long-term benefits even during extreme flooding, and required a greater sacrifice of his acreage, uncompensated. So we were really impressed that he chose that, and we think it speaks to his internal motivation and his drive to take care of the land and water, and also to the relationship that we built with him. And actually, some of that sediment that we excavated out did get to be redistributed onto his fields. So we were glad to reclaim that phosphorus. Instead of heading into the stream and the lake, it's going to be in the field where he can use it. We also try to coordinate with the Agency of Ag on their RAP's inspections. We reach out to farms to just ask if they've been inspected recently, sometimes reach out to our local inspectors to find out when they're going out. And turned out this farm was cited for a direct discharge coming off of his barnyard. And in fact, it was referred to DEC because it was a point source violation. The farmer was really confused because he felt like he'd been doing all the right things. He'd said yes every time he was asked to do something. He'd been proactive. And because it can be confusing for farms, all the different people coming out saying they're there in the name of water quality, and it can be confusing. And so we were there to help explain to him where this was coming from, what he needed to do to address it, who he needed to work with. It was a slow process at first. Some of the contractors fell through, but we were there to help see things along and explain and contextualize and help him understand that no one was calling him a bad farmer or a bad steward, but just that many areas of our farm infrastructure haven't been built with water quality in mind. And so that's what we're inheriting. And this is just something that needs to be fixed. And it doesn't mean that he did a particularly bad or wrong thing. He also, speaking of broadband access, he doesn't have a cell phone or a computer, so he definitely doesn't use email. And so this coordination with the state was challenged. He had to write a corrective action plan. He didn't have a good way to write that except by hand. So he wrote the state a note by hand, and we ended up, they needed more detail than that. So we ended up helping him, talking to understand with him what he planned to do, and then putting that on paper or on the computer and sending that to DEC on his behalf and help get that work done. So we also wrote and managed a grant from the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board to help fund some of the work that needed to happen, and new equipment that would help him transform his silage management system so he could use bales instead of a bunker. And we also wrote a letter to DEC just to let them know and give them the context that this is a farmer that we've been working with, that he's been very proactive, he's taken lots of steps on his own, and he's not just responding to regulatory pressure. And we just wanted to give them that context because just to help them understand where he's coming from. So it's been a really good project. The other thing with that is that we, once we realized that the barnyard was an issue, we began water sampling upstream and downstream of the stream that passes through the barnyard. And we did that with the La Rosa Partnership Program that Hillary mentioned. and continued that the year after it was done so that we can compare that data. We did have some issues with the La Rosa funding program being cut. So we actually we don't have the afterwards data yet. It'll be this coming year that we will try, again, scrapping together on the staff time. The lab fees are covered through La Rosa, but the staff time is not particularly well covered, but it works out with our other programs that we have that we'll be able to collect that data this summer and do a comparison of how the stream was improved as a result of his barnyard work. So that's an example of how some of our different programs have come together in our work with this one particular farm. All of that work was funded variously by the Ag Quip grant from the Agency of Agriculture that Hillary mentioned, as well as the NRCS RCPP that we participate in for the nutrient management planning, and a block grant from the DEC to fund that active stream restoration, and then La Rosa for the water quality monitoring. So that's our little anecdote for you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, well, sounds like you've been busy up or for me over in Franklin County. In all your conversation and your dealings, I'm wondering, you have a small certified farm, so that's under 50 milkers, I believe, or 50 cows, isn't it?
No, under 50
Right.
would just be a small farm, not having to
50
certify. This is
yes.
50 to 200.
Yes, 50 up. And this farmer opted to pay his own way through many of these projects. When you got into the problem they was having with DEC in the barnyard, how did DEC act favorably to that, or how did that go?
You mean in terms of the penalty that was assessed?
Well,
Or
yeah,
you mean in terms of?
First thing they like to do is write up a penalty. So, you know, instead of taking that money and whatever it might be and allowing that to be used toward the fixing of the problem. And here the guy didn't even realize he had a problem.
Right.
That's the whole point is, you know, sometimes regulators are not aware of the real down to earth issues.
Yeah, and that was something that actually proved helpful with the letter that we wrote to DEC to explain the work that we'd done and our experience with this farmer, because it was a significant penalty, and they reduced that penalty significantly in response to the letter that we shared. And we found DEC very, relatively easy to work with and understanding, but certainly it was really disheartening at first to see a penalty being applied to a farm that in so many ways was just going above and beyond to do the right thing. It was definitely disheartening, but we were glad we could at least get the penalty reduced and get the problem solved.
Yeah. And he did receive some funding to help resolve that barnyard issue.
Yeah, through the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board.
Yeah. Questions from committee members? No, pretty quiet. We'll move on to, I believe Justin is up next.
Hello. How much time do we have? I know 10:15 is your next appointment.
Well, that can get pushed a little bit. And we have still Jennifer to come behind you, so I'd take 10 minutes at least if you could keep it within that.
Oh, absolutely. And I've shared a success story with you that my counterpart, Sarah Damsel, wrote. She's the Orleans County District Manager.
Yes.
And if Linda, if you could share that story with the committee, that would be great. And this is a really great story that kind of brought in a lot of partners for a lot of things. And I will just touch on a few things. I did the conservation planning part early on and helping with their easement with the land trust and NRCS, because I primarily work under like Farm Bill support and do a lot of NRCS work. So I wrote this ale plan, and as you can see from the pictures down low, before they needed a fence on this waterway right outside the production area, kind of a violation of the RAPs. If we could scroll down a little bit. And as both Jeannie and Hillary mentioned, they've done some targeted water sampling through this La Rosa program. And Sarah did the same thing. She sampled up top and then down low. And there was some really high phosphorus levels with the cows in the stream. And then you can also see that heavy use barnyard area in the before shot that is kind of pretty denuded and a water quality concern. So with on top of the fencing in the barnyard that was installed with the Agency of Ag BMP program, you can see that down on the next page when Sarah shares the results, that there was a massive reduction in phosphorus. And these water samples really put proof to the work that we do. The before samples that show high level phosphorus is really important information to share with a farmer that they do have a problem or potential problem, because they get a lot of finger pointing and you don't know. But with this water sampling, it really helps kind of strengthen your case. Hey, we have a water quality problem here, and then really target our practices to try to fix that. And with the fencing in the cattle lanes that was done through the Memphremagog RCPP, which is like an EQIP program with NRCS, and then Agency of Ag coming in to team up and do the barnyard, because this was at a time when NRCS kind of had to do full farm fixes, and that's kind of not always financially feasible for a farm or doesn't make financial sense. So what the districts does really well, as me as a conservation planner, Sarah as a district manager, and her team, we really provide help work as case managers and try to get the farmer to the program that they need. It's the most efficient for them and giving them options. And I want to touch on this La Rosa funding that was been pulled was a real bummer, because Sarah and I and Ben Copans were talking with about a larger farm who's interested in doing some improvements. And we proposed a bunch of water quality sampling sites to start this next year to kind of really target the worst spots, because this farmer has a lot of problems and they've been reluctant to get on the ship of environmental conservation. So the water sampling and the monitoring was going to be really crucial to be like, find the spots where we could do simple things to stop these phosphorus drains, especially when you're in a watershed that's impaired by phosphorus. And this is in the Memphremagog, which is impaired with phosphorus. And the targets aren't as bad as Lake Champlain. So work now can really go a long ways in meeting those goals. But when you have to find grants to do the water sampling processing and pay for your time, and then you gotta beg this person and beg that person, it just makes work really difficult. Whereas if we had that funding in stone, And we could be going with that farm and setting up these sites so we are ready to roll at spring runoff at one of the most critical times of the year, that spring runoff, and catch those spots. Whereas, it goes, it's conservation is very slow. So if this continues moving on, then it's, oh, we missed another year. So that was quick. I wanted to share this. Please, if you have some time to look over in this success story in detail, because it's a really great story and really highlights the partners and everything that the conservation districts does well in getting this on the ground.
So why is this funding being cut statewide? Is that state money or federal money?
I believe it's state money with the La Rosa grant because they had two grants, one to process the samples, which I believe is still in place. But I think Jeannie and Hillary both mentioned on this that your time is not paid for, and they can probably follow up a little bit better.
Yeah, Jenny?
Yeah, so what happened was that last year, the funding for the La Rosa Partnership Program was completely cut for that year. So the lab would not even process samples for us. And that was a really dramatic change. This coming year, they are coming back online with processing samples for partners, but it's being managed differently. So it's being much more organized by the DEC, and then the DEC is working with local to actually go out and collect the samples. But DEC is more determining the sites. It sounds like we will be able to have some opportunity to tell DEC what sites we think would be useful to sample. But the other major change is that the sampling season is much compressed. Under the old model, we used to be able to say, we want to collect samples in March, and then we want to collect samples again from September through November, or whatever schedule we wanted. Under the new system, it's all going to be confined to the summer months, which is actually the least effective time to be collecting water quality samples for at least for more erosion driven things. It's good for slow drip like barnyard runoff. But for these more erosion driven issues, it's not a very effective time to sample. And so that's one frustration. In terms of the staff time, that wasn't really funded under either model. That's always been something that we've had to patch together from different sources.
Why I asked that is, we just built a brand new lab at BTC and I mean, spent millions and millions of dollars, and we got a report. I don't know if it was in our ag committee or if it was in appropriations of how that's fully staffed. It's running very smoothly. We're taking care of all the business. Things are going good. And with all these updates and everything, we hear that some sampling's been cut off. The La Rosa Fund, is that through Forest and Park Fish and Game? Is that where that through ANR?
I believe it's through DEC.
Is that where that comes?
Yeah, it's through DEC. Yeah.
DEC.
And Bethany Sargent is the one who, right, guys, who oversees that budget? No? I think so.
And just to kind of add on this, to really get this off the ground and then hearing stories of DEC getting point source and things, they may not be the best place to go for this water sampling support in the future, as they kind of toe that line of regulatory and we're non-regulatory, and it can be difficult sometimes to get that pre-monitoring if the levels are really high, and then a regulatory entity can potentially do something negative with it.
So if you send the samples in to figure out whether you need to do corrective action, they could take that same sample and go and levy penalties against?
I have no clue how that works. I just think when you have a regulatory agency that levies fines and does water sampling, it can get very murky.
Yeah.
Just from my experience, I have no anything from it, but it just seems murky.
Yeah, I don't believe that's actually happened, but it's definitely a concern when talking to farmers about this because it could theoretically happen. We have to give a GPS location for where every sample is taken, so it could definitely happen.
Yeah, well, we know, farmers are suspicious and they have reason to be. When you hear stories about what went on, I don't know if it was at the Mooring Farm or another farm, and then, you folks having to deal with that. Any questions, any members? If not, we'll move on to Jennifer. Senator Collmore.
Yeah, I just wanted to put this in, and I don't want to cut Jennifer off. You can take all the time you need, Jennifer, for heaven's sakes. But I think what Justin just brought up, and what I'm hearing from Hillary and Jeannie too, is that this program, this conservation district, is so important because the focus is not on enforcement. It's not regulatory. It is to help and offer assistance and provide training and resources to sort of always do the right thing. And in 99.9% of the cases, it's what the farmer wants to do. And I just see this as a really good relationship with our agricultural community. It's kind of like you show up, and instead of kind of running the other way and getting away from you, they're happy to see you when they take advantage of everything that you can offer them. So I hope we can find a way, Mr. Chair, to help these folks out this year, whether it's with kind of a reallocation of funding or to do something to help them with especially the grant writing and relieve them of that pressure so that they can go to the farm and do what they really want to do. That's all I got to say. Okay, Jennifer.
Yeah, you raised some good points. So Jennifer, it's your turn.
Sure. Thank you so much. So again, I'm with the White River Natural Resource Conservation District, most of Orange and Windsor County, but we also have an agreement where for agricultural work, we also cover the Ottaquiches district, which is the remainder of Windsor County. So our district has currently 3 staff. We have a conservation specialist, myself, the district manager, and we've also leveraged some of the state funding from the Agency of Ag and a federal grant, or sorry, not a federal grant, a national grant from the NACD, the National Association of Conservation Districts, to fund a program assistant in the White River Junction NRCS office. And that person is, it's sort of like a secretary. It's all administrative work, but she's really going to help free up some of the NRCS staff who, should be out in the field providing technical assistance. So we're really happy to be filling that need. So we're based in the Connecticut River watershed. We have, some different issues on the eastern side of the state. We have some impairments for nitrogen, not so much phosphorus. This might be due to our soils. We have a higher clay content. We have lots of hay and forest, pasture and grazing. And I'm sure you have likely met Paul Doughton and members of the Connecticut River Watershed Farmers Alliance. So we work in an administrative role to support them. We've built them into some of our operating grants. So we do a lot with them. And I'll speak a little bit more about that in a minute. But what I think of our role, it was mentioned before, project managers. I think one of our most important things, since most of our money, operating money is state money, is to help farms comply with the RAPs, help them come into compliance in a non-regulatory way, like a handhold, trying to assist them, choosing between multiple these overlapping state and federal programs, trying to figure out which is the most applicable, most readily available, and try to weigh the pros and cons with them, educating them on the RAPs, and collaborating to fix those issues without the fear of being reported on. That relationship of us being non-regulatory is key. It's really, really critical, as it was pointed out. So one of the ways that we've been able to assist really one-on-one is with nutrient management plan development through our RCPP grant agreement. And so we have been helping with developing plans and also updating plans. And through COVID, the farmers are essential workers, and so they still need our assistance with their paperwork and figuring out programs. So we've been busier than ever, very much still working in the field. We didn't slow down at all, and are going into this season of updating NMPs, creating new ones, as I mentioned, and we've sort of found this niche of assisting small farms and certified small farms with their record keeping. And what we found is, since the RAPs passed and everyone has been working to produce these plans, a lot of the easier farms, the kind of low-hanging fruit, they've got their plans, and when we track them and help them with their soil sampling and their manure sampling over time. But the folks who still need plans written are some of the tougher cases. So it's taken a lot more one-on-one assistance. And, for an example, we're working on a plan this winter that, as it was mentioned, they don't have internet, they don't have a laptop. So we're trying to figure out how to bring them into a safe community space that we can access the internet. And
American Solar.
Oh, I think Linda, maybe if you could mute, thank you. So that's, it's a lot of that one-on-one time that we're able to give and help farmers. It's a lot of input. We use this Go Crop system, which is an online database for creating these plans. And so, we're really sitting one-on-one next to them, typically at a computer and building the plans together. But what we love about it, although that can be tedious, what we really appreciate about this service is that we're building these lasting relationships with farmers where, in order to build the plan, we have to soil sample all their fields, and, we walk the fields with them and get to know what their goals are and what maybe some of the issues we can help with are. And then with our updates, we go back every 3 years and assist with soil sampling. We check in on them every year and give them, a jar we print out the form for them to submit their manure sample. So it's just that continual touching base, building relationships. What we want to build out this and expand on, UVM also has been working on farm management teams. And I think that's, kind of this long-term goal of consistency and trying to reduce the burden on farmers for how many people come out and talk to them about things that sound really similar to them. So having a point person will help with that. So I mentioned the Farmers Alliance, the Connecticut River Watershed Farmers Alliance, and our a partnership. We also partner with them on the equipment lending program. So we have 2 no-till drills. One is owned by the district, one is owned by the Farmers Alliance. But they manage the drills and get them out there in the community and maintain them. We also have a set of scales, portable scales for calibration of equipment, of manure spreaders. The portable scales also can weigh hay yields, which is a requirement, for inputting in your record keeping. And farmers are really eager to find out about their hay yields. So we're glad to be able to provide that service. And we don't charge for rental of the manure scales. That's a service we provide as an update to the NMPs. But we also have a sort of a growing database of equipment in the area through the Farmers Alliance, including a roller crimper. And we applied, on behalf of the Farmers Alliance, we applied for a CEAP grant, which is the Conservation Equipment Assistance Program through the state, which is a great program. That's how we got both our drills, but we applied for an Etchison drill, which is a much smaller no-till drill that we're hoping can get up slopes a little bit easier and can reduce some of the compaction, some of the issues on smaller farms, and also interseeding into existing pasture pretty easily with that. So we're hoping to receive that grant. So to go outside of more of our technical assistance and then into some of the policy work that we've been up to, our district has collaborated with rural Vermont to host sort of a research study with assistance from Vermont Law School's Center for Agriculture and Food Systems to look into the policy questions related to PES, the Payment for Ecosystem Services conversation that's happening. I've been attending those working groups, working with Paul Doughton. And so we're really involved in that process. And we do have a report coming out, very exciting, this week, probably by next week. So I'd be happy to share that with you from the report, coming out of the law school, but addressing some of the, I guess, the important things that the working group should be looking at over the next year. And our goal with this, I see our goal as a district to keep this as a farmer-led initiative. It was prompted by the farmer coalitions. And so we want to, keep farmers as involved in the conversation as possible. We think that they're the experts in having to navigate these programs. So if we're, going to make a whole new program or alter, existing conservation programs, we need to have their voices be heard. So to that end, we're hosting conversations throughout the state this next 2 months. And we actually also have brought in some researchers from UVM who will be writing and publishing a paper about that. So really to get farmers' opinions on some of the questions that are related to payment for ecosystem services. We've also helped to build a growing soil health policy network. This was formed by some of the nonprofit advocacy type of organizations around the state, but then also the conservation districts and then the farmers alliances. And we meet monthly. It's not really a new organization. It really is a network. It's just a monthly meeting where we come together and we share because we see that there's just a lot of silos. There's there has been difficulty communicating, but now it's so easy to meet. And so we just want to share about soil health policy research. We have these 3 subcommittees within the network, a policy subcommittee, a research subcommittee, and then a connectivity subcommittee, which is focused on connecting, all the players, the groups, the farmers, but then also connecting the programs that exist so that there's more awareness of what's out there. And so perhaps what I think our most important work is we are, local subdivisions of government, and we do have an elected board that governs us. And so, we have a responsibility to our constituents, the residents of our districts. And so we've been working with individual towns. This may be something that you all could assist us with. We've been working with individual towns to try to get our district elections onto the town meeting ballot and actually be discussed, in the local elections because we host our elections in November. We do not have any engagement, I would say, in that process, and from the public, it's very difficult. But it's been, it's challenging to do that. I've been trying to do that town by town, and so maybe there's something that could be done statewide, if that's something that my colleagues agree with even. And the last thing I do want to bring up is that a really valuable way that we hear from and we represent communities is by hosting the local working group. So this is a committee that's composed of agricultural producers, owners and operators of forest land, professionals in agriculture and natural resources, technical service providers in the local community. And the role of the working groups, it's a partnership to provide recommendations directly to the NRCS on local natural resource priorities, which establishes the criteria for their conservation activities and programs. So this is a direct link between the farmers and the federal government to influence their programs. And the suggestions are then taken into account with ranking and funding. And, you know, Vermont agencies, if they don't already, they can also. Oh, should I stop?
Yeah, well, thank you, Jennifer. Sounds like you folks have certainly been busy within your district. And we have had the watershed people in, and Paul Doughton was in representing the Connecticut River Watershed Alliance. And so it's great to hear that you work, you know, with them and work together and develop projects. Are there questions from the committee members, Anthony?
Not a question. I just think you do an amazing amount of work. I really appreciate the fact that you take like this sort of holistic approach to what you're doing. You're doing direct hands-on support. You're doing policy support. I mean, it's amazing how much you're doing. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, all the districts are amazing. We're always struck by that on our district manager calls. It's like, wow, this is quite a group of people doing a lot of work.
Yeah, with a very limited budget. Our next guests are waiting in line to get on. Jill, did you have anything else you wanted to add before we close out the session?
Thank you very much for having us, and maybe we'll be in touch offline a little bit to discuss the funding question. But we appreciate you taking the time, and if you have other thoughts or questions for us, we'd be happy to come back.
Yeah, well, we certainly appreciate all you folks and your time that you've devoted and given to us this morning. I think we've all learned quite a bit, and if we get to the point where we need, well, we'll be in touch with Jill anyways. But if you feel there's anything really urgent, you know, get hold of Jill or one of us, and we'll make time to you know, listen and try to resolve the issue. So anything else from other committee members? I guess we're all set. So thanks again, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Bye-bye.
Senators.
We have Nick and Abby with us. I don't know if any of the committee members need to take a break, or you wanna we move forward. We've got an hour still left before our next meet, or hour and 6 minutes or so. But if you're all set, we can move forward and welcome Nick and Abby from the Vermont Land Trust, and get right into hearing all the good and exciting things they're doing and move forward with that. So Nick, welcome to the committee, and you too, Abby. And I guess I'll turn it over to you, and you guys can divide your time up. So I don't want to get between you two on who can talk the most of the lead. But anyways, welcome, Nick, and it's good to see you, and we're waiting to hear from you.
Well, Senator Starr, thank you very much for having us in, and I think you've put your finger on something. Abby and I both love to talk, and we both love to talk about the land trust. So, but we'll figure out how to divide it up and keep you all engaged. It's really exciting to be back with you. I know we got to spend a little bit of time a couple of weeks ago. I did with the committee. We're all I'll say just as a start, we're feeling really optimistic and positive, both about the future of agriculture here in Vermont, which may sound like a strange thing to say given all the challenges right now, but I think you're starting to see this is a sector that is on the move, that's organized, and where we see a lot of possibility. So I'm very excited about that. We want to talk a little bit more about that and the role that the Vermont Land Trust is playing there. And a lot of that is down to the, I think, steadfast support from you, Chairman Starr, and from this committee, and really kind of being advocates for our farm community and recognizing the important role that farming and forestry plays, both in the character and quality of Vermont, but also in its economy and its social capital, and what makes this such a wonderful place, the place that we care so much about. And it's both been a recipe for success in the past. We also all believe that it's very much a part of what the future of Vermont will be, and what a successful future is. And the other thing that we're really excited about is the governor's budget recommend, and to see full statutory funding for VHCB in the mix, whether you call it one-time money or not, is very exciting.
Money.
And it's money, and it's for us, can't be divorced from the fact that the property transfer tax is through the roof this year, and it's through the roof. I'm sure the committee has this information. In fact, I think Senator Starr, maybe you clued me into the report from VHFA, that's through the roof because of sales of homes that are $500,000 and up, and as we dug into the numbers, even $1 million and up. And so, this is a chance for the property transfer tax to do its job, which is to really invest in low-income housing and in conservation. And then for us to come and really, I think, wow you with what the possibilities are of what that investment can create in terms of leverage, in terms of economic development, in terms of equity, in terms of water quality, all these different factors that we're going to talk about today. So I'm very excited to be here with you all, and to talk a little bit about the piece that Vermont Land Trust plays in this broader network of providers and institutions that are working hard every day. We get up every day, just like a farmer does, and go to work on these issues from dawn until dusk, because we care so much about this working landscape and the people who are on it. And I know that's true of Jessica and Jill, and the Watershed Alliances. So we're happy to be a part of a movement that Vermont is leading, and have a chance to talk to you a little bit about that today. So I'm going to turn it over to Abby. Abby joined us last year and has just been a really great addition to our team, and I'm going to allow her to sort of kick off the more formal part of our testimony. But again, I just want to say thank you so much for having us in today.
Well, thank you for being with us. We appreciate it. Abby, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you all. Thank you, Senator, and good to see you all here. So we have a very just short slide deck to share with you, but we want to open it up for conversation. And so feel free to interrupt at any time. If there's things that we've covered or haven't covered, ask us any questions you'd like. One thing that I would like to add to what Nick was saying around the governor's budget, and this is probably something you're familiar with, his recommendation was 20 million for VHCB for housing. And our suggestion or ask to all of you is to just enable that 20 million to be used more flexibly and for the board, the VHCB board, to actually make that determination to ensure that at least part of that funding can flow to some of the things we're going to talk to you about today, to agriculture, forestry, and rural economic and community development. So that's one, I would say, takeaway that we can continue to talk about.
Yep.
Great.
Well, I think too, maybe before the governor put the budget, or after the governor put the budget together, we found that we've got a whole bunch of money coming from the feds for housing. So yeah, that's good that we work with the board, and so we'll keep an eye out for that.
Thank you. Okay, so great. This is what we're hoping to cover today. Just a little bit about who we are as an organization, just a quick reminder. We wanted to spend time just talking about where we are focused right now. This is just such a unique moment that we're in, and that has really forced us to think deeply and respond appropriately to the needs that we're seeing throughout the state, and then really open it up for conversation. So, vision of the Vermont Land Trust is that Vermont's communities and working landscape be vital, resilient, and connected. This is a vision that we've had for quite some time. And as I said earlier, it's one that is really that is being pushed right now, that we as an organization are being pushed, as everybody should be in the state. And that has to do with the environment that we're in and these external factors that are pressing upon us. Here are a few of them: certainly racial equity and justice, climate change, economic vitality, and health and well-being of all Vermonters. For us as an organization, as a land trust, these issues shape us in unique ways. So from the racial equity standpoint, it is true that we are on stolen land, and we need to reckon with that, understand that, and figure out how to address that in partnership with the Abenaki who are here and live on this land. And so Nick's going to talk more about that specifically, but that's how we, that's the dimension that we think very much about related to equity and justice. In terms of climate change, certainly the lands that we're on, the forest land, the agricultural land, can be of great service to us in helping to address climate and resilience to floods, to natural disasters, carbon sequestration and storage. And so there's things that we're working on right now, new pilots and innovation to do just that, to try to invest in our working lands, farms and forests, so that it can provide greater benefit from a climate standpoint.
Yep.
Economic vitality. This is really key, and this has always been important to us, and even more so right now. The last economic recovery that we went through was, as we all know, very unequal. That there were urban parts of the state that saw great opportunity and growth, and rural parts that did not, that continued to be left behind. And it is essential that right now, during this recovery that we're about to embark upon, that everybody be included, including the rural areas of the state. And there's work that we're doing right now where land is the center of that, is and can be the center of that recovery. So that's something we want to talk about as well. And finally, health and well-being. Hasn't COVID just shone a spotlight on that in terms of physical health and mental health? Moreover, there's a mental health crisis in our state right now. We're hearing about it from students to parents to everybody. And one thing that we have seen this year is the role that land has played and trails have played in providing that solace, that people need. When everything else was stripped away, when people couldn't go to the office or they couldn't go to see their friends or their family members or go to the gym or go to the library or anywhere, a coffee shop, the one place they could go was the outdoors. And we saw lots of people flocking to the trails, and that's a value that conserved land continued to play. So these are all of the factors that are, upon us right now, and we want to talk with you about how we're addressing them.
Yep. That sounds good.
Yeah, this is good work going on. So this is like a quick review to all of you, just to kind of ground you in who we are as an organization. This is kind of our history. So founded over 40 years ago, 11% of the private land in Vermont has been conserved. That's over 500,000 acres, farms and forests. We now steward over 2,200 easements. So that's a lot of work. That's more than, I think Nick will keep me honest here, but more than any other land trust in the US. And so the volume of work that we've achieved and that we continue to steward is leading the nation. We have a staff of 43 located in all corners throughout the state. That's one thing that I think really sets us apart, is that we're embedded in communities. We have deep relationships and understanding of local issues. We have expertise in a range of areas, from ecology to forestry to project development and real estate. We have a budget, an operating budget of roughly $3 million annually. We receive, in terms of state dollars, from VHCB, that's a key funding source, and also water quality work. With VHCB, we also work to pair that with federal funds, particularly with farmland conservation. But we're also supported with individual contributions for a membership organization, foundations, and then internal funds. That's just a snapshot of really who we are. I think now I'll turn it over to Nick. Oh,
the map,
go ahead, Senator.
the map over on the right, is that all the different areas?
Yeah, so the map shows you land conserved by Vermont Land Trust in dark green, municipal lands, federal lands. We don't, you can see those here, state lands, those are in the light green, and then other conserved lands, so like Trust for Public Land or Nature Conservancy. You can see here it's a patchwork.
Yep.
The state. And you can see a lot of the land, conserved by Vermont Land Trust up here in Franklin County, Madison County, showing the farmland.
Yeah. Can you scroll that down a little bit so I can see the very top? Or
Oh, is that cut off? Oh, I'm sorry, Senator. What are you looking for?
Might be looking for Newport.
I don't know.
It's right up here.
Remember, a few years back, quite a few now, I guess, Swanton was having trouble with as much conserved land that was happening in their community. And I think we got that all, I think that's all behind us now, but I know we had some discussions in regards to that, and it was the farmland and that stuff. But I was just wondering how that area was doing. I can see over on the eastern side, it's been busy. No, that's good. Thank you.
Great. So I'll turn it over to Nick and talk just very briefly about some of the highlights of this past year, and then we'll go much more deeply into the areas I was mentioning earlier on.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Abby. And Senator Starr, just on your last point, we had a chance to sit down with Senator Parent earlier in the week and just kind of talk through the levels of conservation in Franklin County. And so I think, one of the things that we're very focused on at this point is, in addition to that, continuing to do conservation with communities where it makes sense in a strategic way. We're also very much thinking about what is our responsibility in activating that portfolio of conserved land. We have 11% of the land in Vermont conserved, about 700,000 acres. That's just with the Vermont Land Trust. And if that land isn't active, viable, treasured, thriving, then we're not fully doing our job. That's the standard that we want to set. So as we think about where we're going to be putting energy going forward, it's in addition, like, we're going to continue to conserve land in places where people want to work with us and do that, where it makes sense. And it's a critical thing to keep doing. It's a great way to invest in rural communities, but there are other things that we have to do too, if we want to make sure that these lands are going to stay viable and active. So here's just a couple of highlights from 2020 that I think speak to that. Sorry, does somebody else want to cut in? Okay, so here are a couple of things that just kind of speak to that. In 2020, we conserved 20 farms, working with the Vermont Housing Conservation Board and the federal ASIP AIL program. So delivered, I think, over $6 million of economic stimulus into the rural economy through those projects. 180 families served through community gardens that we helped to establish in different places across the landscape over this year in response to the food security needs that we saw with COVID. We conserved about 4,500 acres of forest land. It was a really great year for us in the forest side, and we've been able to bring in some additional funding to support that, both from the sale out of the Atlas timberlands that we've been doing with the Nature Conservancy over the last couple of years. And also just want to recognize and honor the work that's been done at the federal level. Just this year, the Land and Water Conservation Fund was permanently established and funded at a very significant level. And we see a great opportunity to bring federal land and water conservation funding into Vermont. It does require a match, just like the ASIP AIL funding does. And we think that VHCB is in a really good spot to be able to help to support great community conservation with the Land and Water Conservation Fund. So very excited about that. We also planted a lot of trees, and we've been putting riparian buffers onto projects. So on a map, delineating a strip near a river or a waterway where agriculture has to be curtailed, and where the hope is that vegetation, natural vegetation, native vegetation will grow up and create a buffer that is good for water quality, good for flood resilience, those kinds of things. But what we've learned is that unless you actually plant trees in those buffers, they don't work as well as they should. And we've really stepped up our program of working with the Intervale Tree Nursery, with other providers, to plant trees all across the state, and really activating volunteers to do that. We had, even in a COVID year, we had hundreds of Vermonters come out and help us do tree plantings on farms, getting a chance to connect Vermonters back to the farmers that are in their neighborhood and help to support their operations in that way. We're also very excited about wetland protection and restoration opportunities. Everybody is focused on water quality right now. Jessica was talking about it before we came in. We think the watershed alliances are great. And we know from going out and talking to farmers all across the state that farmers recognize there's a water quality issue. They know they can be a part of the solution, and they're motivated to do it. And they're changing their practices in really extraordinary ways in order to be a part of that solution. And in fact, the only measurable, broad-based measurable impacts on reducing nutrient loading into the lake over the last 3 years have come from the agricultural sector. And that's been studied and measured. And so, wetland restoration is one thing that we've learned can be very important in terms of helping to achieve those water quality impacts. And we've been working with farmers all across the state to protect wetlands where they exist in agricultural land, and to provide financial incentives for farmers to take those lands out of production and restore them into function as wetlands. Not seizing that land, purchasing the rights from the farmers and working with them to make sure to turn them into stewards of those wetlands so they can be doing the work that they're here to do, which is to help clean up our waterways. Really cool project, and we're excited to do more of that work in partnership with the farm community.
You don't off the cuff have a total of the number of wetlands over the years that VLT has conserved, and we keep hearing stories about we're losing all our wetlands, or we've lost a tremendous amount of our wetlands. And I know for years, you folks, along with others, have been working to enhance wetland areas. And I'm wondering, do you have a number, the total number of acres that just VLT has worked on protecting in our wetlands areas?
I don't have the total number off the top of my head, Bobby, but I do have the statistics that I'd like to share here, which I think is relevant. That when we think about where we want to do this wetland protection and restoration work, we've identified across the state of Vermont on already conserved land, so land that already has conservation easement on it, about 150 wetlands that are between 25 and 40 acres in size that could be where there are restoration opportunities, right? So some of them are partially restored already. Some of them are in ag right now and could be restored. And so the potential there is significant. You're talking about, I'm trying to do the math in my head right now. You're talking about
the acreage.
You're talking about 4,000, maybe 5,000 acres of wetland opportunity. Yeah. If those are, depending on where those are located, looking at tackling those together could be a really strategic way to do water quality improvement work across the state. And again, so we see leveraging the relationships that we have with those landowners, bringing federal funding in to help to support the costs of those restorations. There's a lot of solution here that could come to the table, and we're really excited to be a part of it.
Yeah.
Abby, I think maybe the next slide. One area I'm really proud of was the way that we've done work this year to respond to COVID. When I guess about a year ago now, when things started to shut down, we were deeply concerned about what the impact was going to be on farmers, and there were a couple of things that we did to address that. I was also I had the privilege to serve on the governor's recovery task force for the community development work team with Paul Costello and others. And so we got a chance to be a part of the conversation of thinking about, and I learned through that we were seeing a food security crisis and a potential ag viability crisis all coming together in March of last year. And that recovery task force, along with a bunch of us partners, came up with this strategic goal, basically, which was to activate the local food system to feed Vermonters in need. Right, we've got this beautiful farm to plate network and food system. It was losing its regional markets, its export markets were sort of difficult at that time, and we saw a lot of demand in CSAs. But we also saw a lot of hungry people that don't go to farmers markets and don't participate in CSAs, and the opportunity to feed those folks. So we just jumped into action with micro grants to farmers to help them to transition their businesses to be COVID compliant. So personal protective gear, changing their workstations, that kind of thing, helping them develop websites so they could market direct to consumer, and do more sales online. And then big investments in working with the USDA, with shift meals, with the Abenaki, with VYCC, to help to develop food delivery and food security programs, so boxes of produce that would go to food shelves, and in the case of more rural parts of the state, to actually be delivered directly to houses, food security boxes that went out by the thousands. With the West Farm in Jeffersonville, Vermont, which is a farm that we own and steward on behalf of that community, as the epicenter for a lot of that work, both as a place where food was grown, but also as a hub for consolidating and integrating the food that was coming from farms all across that area in Lamoille County and then out to people in need. So we're really excited about that work. We know there are a lot of great food security organizations that work in Vermont. We have an incredible food bank. Hunger Free Vermont is a really important and vibrant organization. So we know there's a role for us to play that's really about connecting farmers into that system. And we were excited to do a bunch of that work this last year, and we'll continue it in the years to come. I think that idea of making sure that our food system, our local food system, which we're so proud of, feeds Vermonters in need, is something that that's something we really need to hold on to long after COVID goes away.
Yeah, and
Next slide.
we're spending quite a lot of time on food security and all that in our committee. And I think this coming week, we've got different groups coming in to try to put a package together to work into the future with a program that would secure, make our food systems more secure.
Excellent. Well, and I mean, we're also in conversation with Senator Leahy and Senator Sanders and their staffs about food security and resilience work at the federal level too. So, always in these cases, what we're looking at is what can we be doing here in Vermont and what can we be doing with partners at the federal level to bring more resources in to match whatever the state is able to do. It's always the way that we're thinking about it.
Yeah.
Abby talked about this already, that in this moment we saw this incredible reach for the outdoors, and you could see that showing up in a whole bunch of different ways. Parking lots just being packed everywhere for town forests and community lands of different kinds. Just a real. Sorry, go ahead, Bobby.
Forest and Parks, Mike Schneider's already been in looking for more money to add on to the parking areas at some of these trailheads so that we can, make it easier for people to get to the trailhead. So, no, it's really coming alive.
It's amazing, and I think it dovetails so well with some of this community forest work that we've been doing over the last decade or so, and I think it's really stepped up. And we're very supportive of Commissioner Snyder and the work that he's doing to help make it possible for more people to get out and experience and enjoy these natural resources that we have. We participated in a tremendous number of community projects. Some of the ones that really excited about. This is, I think, an example of the Vermont Land Trust just doing its best kind of work. As folks know, Kingdom Trails is this nationally recognized and regarded mountain bike trail network up in the Northeast Kingdom. The vast majority of that land, of that trail network, is on privately held land. Yeah, which is great. And those landowners have, allowed the trails to come on, and there's been a lot of economic development that's happened as a result, and new traffic into the Northeast Kingdom throughout the course of the year. So very successful project. And there was this one, but it's fragile, right? If somebody pulls out, then the whole network can be affected, and then it's creating less benefit for everybody. And there's nothing like bad or wrong about that, but it's just a fact of how that system works. And there was this one piece of land that was sort of at risk of being pulled out of the network. And we were able to come in and help secure that land with Kingdom Trails, help them raise the money that they needed to buy it. Very successful project that very quickly brought in a lot of community fundraising from folks like, a lot of folks who use the trail network at Kingdom Trails are from Canada, are from the Boston area. So we were basically just facilitating this love for Kingdom Trails, and we're able to help secure this connector piece that makes sure that network remains intact. So that was I think, a really good example of us doing the work that needs to be done, and a role that we love being able to play, helping to activate and facilitate that energy that's already there.
Well, you guys played a key role in that. If it hadn't have been for you folks, I don't know if that would have gotten pulled off. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Bobby. There's a bunch of them that are out there. I think, the one that I know is near and dear to your heart and your neighborhood,
Newport.
Bobby, is Newport and the Bluffside Farm. And,
Yeah.
there are some beautiful pictures that we've seen of the bike path going in there. And I'm very excited that as things might maybe relax this summer, we'll be in a position to do a ribbon cutting there. Just an extraordinary project and a kind of result that we're hoping to recreate in other communities all across Vermont. It's really exciting to be doing that work too.
Yeah.
So next slide, Farmland Futures. This is a really important emphasis for VLT right now and for me. There's a lot that needs to be done to support a viable food system going forward. And there are a lot of great organizations that are leading that work in different ways. We're really excited about the Farm to Plate strategic plan that's going to come out next week. And we're going to be coordinating and taking pages from it with Ellen and their team and all the other folks in the network to really use that as an organizing strategy and document for us around the future of farm viability. One piece that is called out very clearly in that document that you'll see, when it launches next week is the need to get the next generation of farmers successfully onto land. And there are challenges to that. There are financial challenges, there are business model challenges, there are land configuration challenges, there's access to capital challenges. And we've recognized over a decade of really focusing on new and beginning farmers as a particular group that we want to work with, that not only do those challenges need to be addressed, but they need to be addressed in a really coordinated way so that those new and beginning farmers don't have to go to us and Farm Viability and the Intervale Center and Extension and the bank and whoever. They need to spend their time farming, not figure out how to manage the technical assistance provider network. So we've done a lot of really good work with some federally and again, with a lot of federal funding support to bring those networks together to provide one point of contact between the Intervale Center, Farm Viability, NOFA, and us for these new and beginning farmers, to be working with them on a case management basis that says, okay, we've got a group of 300 new and beginning farmers that we're working with. We got a group, the set of land that we know is going to transfer going forward. How do we best match the right people to the right land and give them the supports that they need to be successful? And one piece that VLT is taking on within that we are very well positioned to do, and we've had a great bit of success with over the last year, is to raise a financing vehicle that allows us to provide flexible, low-cost lease terms to new and beginning farmers to help them get onto land and get through that first 2 to 3 years when they're in the process of building their business and getting to profitability. Last year in November of 2019, we made an announcement that we were going to launch a Farmland Futures Fund and a $15 million fund that would allow us to do this. And I thought it would take us a year or two to raise that money, and we raised it in 4 months, including a $10 million investment from the state's Clean Water Revolving Fund. So we're really excited. We're deploying. We actually just got the first installment of that capital from the state last week, and we're deploying it out into farm projects all across the state. Again, providing low-cost, flexible lease terms that allow farmers to get onto land and get going with their businesses. We're committed to putting 200 new and beginning farmers successfully onto land over the next 10 years, and really supporting them and all of the diversifying farm businesses that are out there to be successful. And we know it's going to take more capital than that too. 15 was sort of our starting place, and so we're looking at expanding that fund. Again, there are a lot of federal opportunities that are related to that. So we could see a much larger investment structure being in place, a much larger revolving fund in place to support new and beginning farmers in Vermont. And I'll just say too that, Bobby, I know you know this, and I know other folks on the committee will as well, but supporting new and beginning farmers is also supporting exiting farmers, right? You're creating a pathway for them to get out. So that it accomplishes both. We want to create an honorable, graceful, and financially sustainable exit for farmers that are, worked hard on this land and trying to get out. And we want to create an opportunity for new farmers to be successful. And that's really what our work is focused on in this Farmland Futures area.
Does it work when, Nick, when we have a farmer that wants to sort of get out and he's already sold the development rights and done all the right things to, move along? Is that the time to pick up these, if there's wetlands on that farm that could be preserved and haven't been, is that the time to do that, either to help the new guy get on or to help the senior member that wants to leave to exit with some dollars to help their living expenses into the future?
Absolutely, Bobby. It's a really important point that when that moment comes up, there's an opportunity. If the farm is conserved, if it doesn't have an option to purchase at agricultural value, that could be added on top. If there are environmental protections that want to be added to that property based on what we know now about soil health and sustainability, those are incredibly good times to put those protections in place and to pay for them so that they can help to support that transition.
Yeah.
Thank you. Abby, is there another slide? Yeah, and then we're also just trying to experiment at the frontier of a lot of different aspects of our work. Recognizing that with the relationships that we have with over 2,200 landowners in the state, which Abby is right, that's far and away the largest conservation portfolio in the country. Just to put it in context, the Nature Conservancy nationally over the entire country has 3,500 easements. It's just to give you a sense of what the scale of this portfolio is, and the conservation work that's been supported by Vermont. But again, we want to bring more value into that relationship, right? We want to make sure that the landowners continue to see the Vermont Land Trust as an organization that's bringing them value, that's helping them to solve problems and to maintain the viability of their businesses and their way of life. And help them to achieve the things that they want to achieve in their land that are good for all of us. And so we have this soil health pilot that we've been able to develop. Again, federal funding, USDA Conservation Innovation Grant, national level grant program that we applied for last year. One of 14 projects picked across the entire country for this grant, and it's $2.5 million. That's going to come, about $1.5 million of that is going to be direct incentive payments to farmers to try different soil management practices and for us to do some measurement of those soils with UVM and some other partners. So we're starting to figure out what are the kind of practices and approaches that lead to measurable benefits in terms of soil health. And also in that we're taking the chance to measure carbon as well. And thinking about what are the opportunities to facilitate more soil carbon work in the state, and really take the conversation that's happening about payments for ecosystem services right now and turn it into pilots and programs and actual payments. We've been talking about this for a long time, and I'm one of the worst offenders, so I'm not pointing fingers at anybody else, but talking about it is not going to make it happen. We need to move into actually showing how it can be done. And these measurements are a really important first step in that.
It would seem that, if we don't have the measurements to verify what we say we can do, who's going to want to buy, a pig in a poke? You've got to have some facts and figures to really implement a forward-moving program.
Yeah, it comes down to science and study, and so we're trying to play a role in that along with a bunch of others. In the places where that's more established, in the forest carbon area, there's just the protocols are clearer and the markets are clearer. And we're trying to tackle other pieces like how do you create projects that are of sufficient scale in Vermont so that the economics work out? How can we get access to forest carbon markets for Vermont forest landowners? The the viable size for a forest carbon project right now, and I think I've talked with the committee about this before, is about 5,000 acres. And as Commissioner Snyder likes to remind us, the median forest parcel size in Vermont in the current use program is 150 acres, right? We got a lot of forest, but it's in a lot of small pieces. So how do we bridge that? How do we create the opportunity for those folks to participate? And we've done some really good, innovative demonstration work around how do you aggregate landowners together, including a project with Cold Hollow, Canada, where we have 8,600 acres of aggregated land coming together to participate in what is really the first true aggregated forest carbon offset project in the country. And we're looking at opportunities to expand on that model and to help other people to develop forest carbon initiatives and programs. We're really interested in and honestly humbled and grateful to be a part of a discussion and work around indigenous lands. I think the committee will remember that we helped to create the first tribal forest in Vermont, the Nalheganaki Forest.
Yes.
And I'm sure you do. And we continue to work with Chief Don Stevens and with other representatives from the Missisquoi Abenaki Band and the Elnu Abenaki Band on identifying lands that are of particular significance to the Abenaki and coming up with plans and strategies for returning that land to their ownership and and they wouldn't even call it ownership, right? They would call it their stewardship. So that's been a really wonderful part of our work and something that we are continuing to expand and build on. It's been, I think a real learning opportunity for us and a great relationship building opportunity with folks who have just a really profound connection to Vermont, or as they would say, to Indokina, this land that has been their home since time immemorial. So really excited to be building that and continuing to do more work in that area. And then I've talked a little bit about this, but we see land restoration, a bunch of different kinds, whether that's a watershed and a wetland restoration project, riparian buffers, and actually planting the trees there. Thinking about reforestation in certain cases, or species mix of the forests in certain areas to help to increase the diversification of species there. Invasive species management. I mean, all these factors we're working on with landowners all across the state. And, I see a lot of opportunity to, again, be bringing more private resources in to support innovative land restoration, land management work here in Vermont that could leverage state work and also federal funding that could come in to support this. Vermont, I know you guys have heard me say this before, but I'm going to say it again. Vermont's forests and our agricultural landscape, they're a state treasure. They're something that we need to protect, care for. And the significance of them is being understood by more and more people outside of Vermont as well. This is a regionally significant natural resource that we have. And I would argue that it's actually being seen now as a globally significant natural resource. And it exists because of the decisions that individual landowners across the state make every single day. And being able to work with and influence and provide incentives that support those decisions is just a real joy for us and what drives us to come to work each day. I think I'm going to leave it there. I think that's our last slide. And I hope I've left enough time for some questions. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Nick. And I'm sure, we'll have some questions. One, and you spoke to it to some degree on a national basis, but when you look at, say, New England, how are we doing in regards to preserving and conserving our ag lands and forest lands compared to our neighbors to the east and west and south? Are we hanging in there? We're losing? Are we gaining? How's that? Have you ever looked at that?
Yeah, I mean, we actually look pretty closely at it, and I think Vermont's done a very good job in terms of conservation easements, and putting the kind of broad structures of resource protection in place and support in place. The things that we see around the edges that I think are more troubling are related to forest fragmentation, and I wouldn't be surprised if Commissioner Snyder had continued to talk about that. You know, we see parcelization happening in forests, and when that parcelization happens, so as the parcels get smaller, the tendencies for driveways, roads, other things just to come through. Once that happens, a lot of the function of those forests, you know, starts to become impaired. So that's something that across the state we just need to really be reckoning with and thinking about. And on the ag land side, we're just the economics of agriculture right now are meaning that land is starting to go out of production. And that's concerning. You know, if after a couple of years of not being in production, it loses a lot of its productivity. And, you know, for all of the land in Vermont, it's going to take some time to rebuild the kind of soil health that's going to allow it to really function as fully as it should. So I think those are challenges and headwinds for sure. We've got a really good starting place with the amount of conservation that we've done and the structures that we have in place to support good working land stewardship. But we got some headwinds too. And I think, in my view, the economic viability of agriculture is a place where we really need to focus. And, you know, Chuck Ross would, if he were here, would say, I was on a call with him yesterday, you know, the best conservation plan for a farm is an economic viability plan. And on some level, I agree with the former secretary on that.
Yeah, you can't, yeah, because so many of our farmers in ag lands in dairying, and you know, they haven't been paid properly for 5 years, and you know, you keep losing your assets as you move forward at that rate, losing money, and so it isn't working. But we in our committee have worked and we're working on a dairy enhancement program to try to figure out some way to get that price up. And, you know, I've said it many times, you know, it's pretty sad when you go to the grocery store and a gallon of milk costs about the same dollars as a pint of ice cream. You know, it doesn't really make much sense, you know, that you can get $4.50 into a pint of ice cream and go pick up a gallon of milk for, in some stores, some days, $3.99. But anyhow, no, we know we have some heavy lifting ahead of us, and yeah, I think we talked a lot about this in committee. You know, you can work on the cost side of somebody maintaining and owning something, or on the profit side of it. And I'm wondering, have you looked into why forest land is getting fragmented? If it is you know, is it inter-family transitions? And, you know, like in my family, you know, we had about maybe 5,000 acres, but as it moves down through the generations and you keep it within the family, it keeps getting smaller chunks because there's more people, more heirs or whatever. And have you folks looked into that at all?
We have. You've just raised like two really interesting points, Bobby. And I think, you know, back on the farm side for just a second, you know, one thing that I'm also very concerned about is, and that we're spending a lot of time at VLT focus on, is the fact that fewer and fewer Vermonters are connected to or know a dairy farmer who lives down the road. When I was growing up, and I've talked a lot with Carolyn Partridge about this in the House side, because she's next door neighbors with my grandparents, or where my grandparents lived in South Windham, Vermont. And they had a shared neighbor, Jim Perry. Jim Perry was a dairy farmer down there. And there were 3 or 4 dairy farms on Windham Hill when I was visiting there as a kid and spending time with my grandparents, and none of them exist anymore. And that's sad for the economy and for, for what's happening in Windham in some ways. But it's also, the other thing that it creates is it just creates a situation where all those people who live on Windham Hill don't have a dairy farmer down the road. They're not personally connected to it. And I think one thing I'm really concerned about is the way that, as we struggle with, as a state, all of us, in figuring out how do we move forward with a strong economy, with a good environment, with an agricultural sector that works, that it's easier and easier. It's never been easier to just point a finger at somebody that you've never met and say they're the problem. And I'm concerned that that's happening. And, there are fewer and fewer folks in Vermont who have had their car pulled out of a ditch by the tractor that's down the road, or spend time at a kitchen table with their dairy farmer neighbor. And we're not going back. We're not going to be able to change that, but we can build a bridge so that people feel more connected to each other. And that's something that we're really focused on. The forest fragmentation, I think it's happening for a lot of different reasons. It's what you've described. And it's also, it's tending to happen in places where there might be a lot of economic pressure too. And so, this is something that's happened a lot in Stowe and in Morrisville, and also down by Stratton. In that area, you can see the proliferation of these 50-acre blocks of forest land, and maybe with one house in the middle. And I think, so there's a lot of different factors, and it's a complex topic, and I'd love to come back and talk with you guys more about it in the session at some point.
Yeah. Are there questions from the committee members? Brian, Senator Colmore?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I know we only have about 10 minutes before we're supposed to be on the floor, but I wanted to follow up on your question. When you ask most people in New England about forest land, I think most people think of Maine, and the fact that pretty much everything north of, Bangor, pick a town, is just
woods.
Was that a deliberate move, or is it just because nobody wants to move there?
I know. I don't care about going up to Presque Isle because of the ride between Bangor and Presque Isle is so. It's all you see is trees, Brian, and a moose now and then.
I hear you. I've been there.
Go ahead.
Well, anyway.
Well, I think it's a great point. I think one of the things that we're dealing with here in Vermont is that so much of this forest was at one point agricultural land too. So that's, in terms of where it started, right? We were at a point where we were only 20% forested in this state 150 years ago, and now we're 80% forested. So a lot of it was in ag land, it was in small holdings. So we were even starting from a place where there are fewer 5,000 acre chunks to begin with. That's one of the dynamics. There's a lot of things that go into that. But I agree. I think another thing that I hear in what you're saying, Senator, is, that there's this tendency for people in the southern part of New England to just kind of lump everything that's beyond a certain area as the Great North Woods. And
wilderness. Nobody lives there.
Yeah, and how do we help those folks to understand that, the water that they drink and the food that they eat and the places that they recreate exist because of the stewardship of people who live in those places. And so again, I actually think payments for ecosystem services, carbon, soil health, those kinds of things are a great way to kind of start that conversation with Southern New England.
Thanks, Nick.
Yeah.
Other questions, Anthony? Anything? Been good? Well, I think this has been a great presentation from you folks, and certainly interesting for us. And as we move forward, well, you guys know that our committee has always been very supportive of VHCB and making sure to try to figure out somehow to get them enough money to really be a player and in preserving and conserving farmland and forest land and supporting housing. I mean, it's been a great run for VHCB over the years, from 30 odd years ago, I guess, when we first put that together over in the House Ag Committee to, and I think part of that success has been continuity of Gus being at the helm, and we haven't had to change directions a lot of time. We've kind of stuck with the map and haven't got off on the side roads a lot. And Vermont Land Trust has been a major player in keeping the car on the road, you might say. So I don't, in the legislature, there's great support for VHCB. I know certainly on the both sides of the House or the Senate. But as we move forward, don't be shy about calling us if we need to hear from you in regards to any of the projects, or money, or if we're screwing up something, don't hesitate to call us and say, hey, what'd you do? Fall down and hit your head? Because we don't always do everything perfectly.
Well, Bobby, I appreciate that. I really appreciate that invitation. I have to say, I don't feel like we've ever had to have that conversation with you guys. Your support has really been steadfast. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Well,
and also, and to add to that, we will be back in 2 weeks. VHCC members from throughout the state are going to be testifying in different committees. And so you'll have the opportunity to hear from a bunch of different folks, small land trusts, farmers involved. So you'll be hearing a lot more.
Yeah, well, it's always good to hear from you. It's interesting and meaningful, and so thanks a lot. We've got to run to get on the Senate floor Zoom here in a few minutes. So thanks again, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.